afternoon, everyone. My name is Rudy Kimmy. I'm the director of the Entrepreneurship Institute Africa at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And it's my pleasure today, on behalf of my colleagues, Professor Henry Vissing and Brad Mears, to welcome you warmly to our first Blue Sky seminar series. I'm also delighted to announce that the registrations for today have exceeded over 200, which I think is a fantastic achievement. And I want to challenge all the participants today to tweet about it, to write about it, to share it, so that we can really build a culture of innovation, entrepreneurship, and resilience in South Africa. Just a few words about the Entrepreneurship Institute. The Entrepreneurship Institute Africa is based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and it's as a result of a joint venture between the university and the Department of Economic Development, Tourism, and Environmental Affairs of Tukwini Municipality. Our primary aim is to contribute towards knowledge and thought leadership in aviation and within the broader business ecosystem. So today's seminar, How Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Resilience Builds Business Success, is a critical topic. And the reason why is because of the significant economic challenges that we are facing in South Africa. So in a tough economic environment, one of the best ways to deal with this is to think out of the box, to come up with new ideas. I remember the late Theodore Roosevelt, the late former American president, he made a very profound statement one day. He said, and I quote, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And this is exactly what innovation means. It means that we try to repurpose and do better with what is available to us. Now, the procedure for today's online seminar is as follows. The presentation will be approximately 30 minutes. All participants will be muted. However, we do encourage interaction, and we want to encourage interaction through you utilizing the chat box to post comments, and then also to put the questions in the Q&A box that you will see at the bottom of your screen. The questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So myself and possibly Professor Henry Vissing will monitor the chat and the questions, and then we will ask our speaker to address these at the end of the presentation. The education manager, Mr. Brad Mears, he will close out the event at approximately 4:55 p.m. Now, on to our speaker. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to welcome a friend and a former colleague of mine. We both worked at De Beers Finch mine in the far northern Cape. James has a sterling career within the mining industry. And I won't go into his extensive CV. We had the CV on the flyer, but James is currently the managing director of Botswana Diamonds PLC. And the reason why I've invited James to speak on the topic is because mining is a tough, competitive, and expensive sector to be in. And who better to speak about innovation, entrepreneurship, and resilience than someone who is so deeply immersed in the mining industry. So James, thank you for availing yourself to speak on these core principles. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And I would like to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rudy. Thank you very much, Professor Tu, and thank you very much for hosting this discussion. Rudy, I'd like to add as well that it's actually a most topical discussion too as well, seeing BHP's bid for South Africa's oldest mining company, Anglo American. And Anglo American may disappear. within the next few months if the bid is successful. And this has obviously huge implications in terms of jobs, revenue, and a considerable amount in South Africa. So I've been given half an hour, and I've got three parts to what I would like to chat about. The first part is a very brief theoretical leadership framework. I'm not an academic. I'm a geologist by profession. I have an MBA and I've been running mining companies, but I think it's always important to start with that. And I think this will be a new framework for many of you. But it encompasses the theme that Rudy asked me to talk about: innovation, entrepreneurship, and resilience. And I'm very pleased that also adds in the bits about Ubuntu too as well. Delighted on that. The second part of, and the vast bulk of the discussion will be about a particular leadership story, which will hopefully be quite practical and illustrate these illustrate the leadership model. And I'm going to take that part from my junior mining career. A junior miner is essentially a mining entrepreneur. If there is time, or I might touch on two much shorter stories, one from my corporate career, which spanned the first 20 years of my working life, and one from my non-profit organization. I don't think you can call it a career. I think you can call it my contribution, where entrepreneurship, resilience, and innovation is equally important as it is in the mining entrepreneur and corporate space. So to jump straight in, my theoretical framework comes from an organization called Common Purpose. Common Purpose is part of a leadership development organization which looks at developing leaders across the public, private, and NPO sector. It's a non-profit organization, so we're very different from a business school, whether it be the UKZN or Gibbs or elsewhere, because we deal with all three sectors. Those sectors which can't afford it, we get sponsorship for. And very importantly too as well, is part of the modus operandi is that the courses in which we run must represent the demographics of the country in which we operate under. So that's an important consideration. The two underlying themes behind this are leadership beyond authority. And that's a very important concept, because let's say you're a general manager in your working environment. How do you illustrate leadership outside your working environment when you haven't been given the title of general manager? So the concept of leadership beyond authority is really important. And the other one, which speaks directly to the fourth theme of Ubuntu, is that of cultural intelligence. And these two actually underpin the leadership framework. And it's a very simple model. It's called the Compass model, and I'm going to fly through it. I'll give the notes to Rudy, and he can share it actually afterwards. The first part is CO, which is confidence. It's about being authentic and bringing your whole self to work. It's a really important thing. I see so many corporate leaders who, when you look at their speeches, it's been written by a public relations manager. It's not necessarily authentic or not necessarily credible, but obviously very good. So it's about confidence. The next one is about mindset. That's the M in Compass. And that's by being inclusive, intentional, and courageous. A really important concept, particularly in terms of being an entrepreneur. The third one, P, is place. Many of you would have heard of the situational leadership model, because all leadership happens within a context at a particular time and a particular place. And your reaction as a leader will often have to be different depending on the context or situation. The penultimate one is attributes. And this talks to the three legs of cultural intelligence being innovation, resilience, and agility. And agility is the basis of being able to be innovative. And then finally, the final two S's are skills. And there's several here, things such as active listening, making decisions, effective questioning, influencing. And I think that's a really important concept, particularly in today's kind of social media work. problem solving, and then almost 180 degrees from this, reflective practice, and then finally storytelling and communication. Now, I was asked that, do I have a PowerPoint presentation for this? And the answer was no, because what I hope to give here is one, perhaps two or three stories, which hopefully will resonate with you, rather than giving a PowerPoint presentation with lots of lovely models and slides such as that. So I'm going to dive straight into my mining junior. Now, this may be a foreign term to many of you in this country, but it's not a foreign term to many in the world. And essentially, a mining junior is a startup or an entrepreneurial mining company. So many of you will be familiar with the diamond mines, gold mines, coal mines, etc., that we have in South Africa. But I'm not sure how many of you will be familiar with how they actually started. If many of you may know the story about how Cecil John Rhodes came to be what he was in South Africa, but I'm not sure how many of you would know how we actually created the first mine, the De Beers mine in Kimberley in the first place. So I'm going to tell you a story about the creation of one of Botswana's most profitable mining operations from scratch. And I hope it will be an interesting story, and I hope it will clearly illustrate the four themes which I've actually been asked to talk about. Now, what the story is all about, what is called the Karowe mine in northeast Botswana, and I'm going to almost start with the end and the beginning. The end is it's a highly profitable mine. It gave dividends in its second year of operation, and I think for any large industrial organization, that's quite an impressive feat. And it's produced the world's second largest diamonds. Then, in addition to all of that, it's a model employer in terms of who it employs. It's a model taxpayer. So its contribution to society in general in Botswana is great. So now let me go back to the beginning. You've heard about the end, and as I travel through the story, you might be intrigued about how on earth did we end up at the end. The Karowe mine was called AK6 in the 1960s when it was discovered. It was discovered by De Beers, and it was considered too small and low grade, and it was left. It was put into a filing cabinet, and it was just left. And the important point I just want to make from here, and it goes back to my leadership model, is that decisions are always made in the economic and political context of that time. So when you look at a decision made by a business, a university, a government, etc., you must always bear in mind what was the economic, political, and cultural context at that time, because things are very different now, as they will be in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So that's a really important point. Fast forward to 2005, where there was some fairly significant groundbreaking new technology that came into the exploration environment. And in exploration, there is a saying that every time there is a breakthrough in technology, the exploration clock starts ticking again. And so we had a look at this technology, and we found that the deposit called AK6 was much larger and was much higher grade than what was originally envisaged. So here is technology or innovation actually coming to play and being a key disruptor here in the mining industry. A joint venture was formed between my company, African Diamonds, and De Beers, and we applied for a mining license because clearly the project had commercial potential, it had legs, and the mining license was awarded to the joint venture. And here's an interesting part, which we'll talk to resilience a bit later on, is the mining license was given on the basis of an open tender for the diamonds. And for any of you who have read about De Beers and the diamond mining industry, that this was a complete anathema to De Beers and open tender, because it basically talked about open market pricing for all the goods. So when De Beers heard about this, the next two parts of the story talk directly to resilience. They immediately said they will apply for a retention license, which will basically put the mine or the potential mine on care and maintenance for an indefinite period of time because they didn't believe it was profitable. Not necessarily so. They did not want to have the condition of tendered diamonds. They wanted to market the diamonds themselves. So they said they're going to apply for the retention license. They were the majority owner, and there was nothing we could actually do about it. I was the managing director of the company, and you can imagine I was very conflicted. I'd spent over 21 years of De Beers, a wonderful career there. I'd worked directly with the chairman. I had a strong affiliation too with it. And here I am now being managing director of African Diamonds and being asked to take De Beers to court to launch a high court action against them. And I think I went grey during the course of this particular board meeting. And a very dear friend of mine, who was my country manager, Motswana, said to me, I think, Jamesy, we need a comfort break in this meeting. I didn't, but I got the drift. So he took me outside, and he was a man of very, very few words. And I hope this will resonate from a leadership perspective in terms of the model, is that he said to me very clearly, the company that you worked for, although it's the same name as it is now, is not the same that you actually worked for, who's not the same company you are talking about now. It's a very different company. So please get that clear actually in your own mind. The second part is you have shareholders. You have to actually work for your shareholders, many of which are Botswana. And whichever decision you take, we as Botswana will back you. And of course, it sounds mind-blowingly obvious at the time in retrospect, but it wasn't actually at the time. So I went back in and agreed with the board decision that, we can't allow this to happen, and we must launch a high court action, high court interdict against De Beers. So the next day was a bit of theatre. There was the Botswana Resource Sector Conference, which is the equivalent of the Mining Indaba in Botswana, and I was second up after the Minister of Mines. Not because we knew this was going to happen, it was just one of those things. And I was on from 7:45 to 8:15. So I got up there, started off my presentation, nice PowerPoint, lovely slides, photographs of drilling rigs and diamonds, etc., etc., etc. The clock ticked over at 8 o'clock, which was 7 o'clock UK time, when we issue our press releases. And I kind of put the presentation down and said, I'm reading a press release, which basically said that we are launching a urgent high court action against De Beers to prevent them from applying for a mining license. That Sunday, in the Sunday Times, I was labeled as a traitor. Front page of the Sunday Times, I was labeled as a traitor. How, as ex-personal assistant to Nicky Oppenheimer, could I be taking De Beers to court? I had calls from what I thought were my friends, but weren't, saying that, my career and reputation would be in complete tatters. Because what do you have in the entrepreneurial space? All you have is a reputation. Now, if you're a corporate person, you have a title, you're part of an organization, and dare I say it, you can hide behind your title sometimes. But if you're the managing director of a junior mining company, an entrepreneur, all you have is a reputation. But anyway, I had to live with that. And it was a very, very uncomfortable 10 days until the court decided in our favor and granted us urgency, which I was completely delighted with. And the old De Beers, I think, came to the fore after that, and there was lots of very late discussions going on into the evening where they withdrew the application for a retention permit on the basis that the government then grants De Beers the right to market the diamonds. We were asked, would we agree with this? And we said, of course, it's a mining license. Why would we not agree with it? So that was good. So we kind of kissed and made up and kind of went forward. The second part of this story, or the second moment of the story, is in 2009 when we had the global financial crisis. Now, hopefully, some of you are old enough to kind of remember the global financial crisis. And De Beers came to us and said, look, they can't raise the $380 million capital to develop the mine. The world is in a very, very bad place at the moment. And it's just not possible. So they said to us, well, what do you want to do? And I said to my board, why don't I do a fresh study to see if it really will cost $380 million to build the mine, and see if we can come up with something innovative, not just from a technical perspective, but from a manning perspective, from a remuneration perspective, from a fiscal terms perspective. So looking at it all from creating a new business from afresh, but taking the resource which we actually had. So we came up with the number of $120 million. Again, I got reams and reams of criticisms from De Beers saying that this was completely impossible. How on earth can you build the same mine with the same throughput and the same output for less than a third of the cost? And we went through answered all of their questions. They just didn't believe us. What would we know as a mining junior? But I was very blessed. We had some of the world's top experts sitting on my side of the table who were innovative, individual, and kind of chiefly worked for themselves. So along this journey, we eventually said, look, we're not going to agree on this. We really do believe we can build this mine for 120. And they said, oh, we really believe we can do it for 380, but we can't afford to actually build the mine. So we said to them, well, why don't you sell it to us? And I cheekily said, well, you think it's worth nothing, so you can give it to us. And they said, quite rightly so, well, you think it's worth 200 million, so you can give us 200 million. So we arrived at this kind of rather arbitrary number of $49 million. And I don't know why it was 50, why it wasn't 50, but it was 49, but be that as it may. And I think they probably thought, well, we're in the middle of the global financial crisis. How on earth is a small junior company going to be able to raise $49 million and then raise another $120 million to actually build the mine? So I suspect they thought, this is fine. They've made the offer to buy us out. They're probably not going to manage it. They'll go away eventually. Well, I went, I really kind of prostituted myself in front of all the different diamond companies I know, and many of them are still around today, all the different financial houses. And, we had run out of money as African Diamonds. We ran out of money about 2 months previously. So my board thought we could pull it off. 3 months passed, 5 months without a salary. My wife began to stop asking me, have you got any money? I said, don't worry, we'll make a plan. And we did make a plan throughout it all. And even when my doctor, when I went to him, being quite stressed about this whole thing, saying, you know what, James, you're the only person who really thinks that you can actually pull this thing off. Shouldn't you be listening to 1 or 2 other people like your wife and your other people? And I said, yes, but I think we could. And a chance encounter with a Swedish recluse who leads a mining conglomerate spanning most of the world. Very different model from Anglo-American. Anglo-American has huge offices. They were 44 Main Street, 45 Main Street, 55 Marshall Street, St. James Square in London, etc. This mining conglomerate, which at the time was bigger than Anglo-American, head office was the size of my house, and I have a medium-sized house. Very, very different model, but a $15 billion enterprise. So I was introduced he may his soul rest in peace, a really successful mining entrepreneur by the name of Lucas Lundin. The meeting was over dinner in Paris. I was told I must fly up there. I said, I have no money to fly there. And my chairman said, well, you better make sure you get there. So I did. And there was Lucas Lundin with the most beautiful and most intelligent lady accompanying him. And he poured lots of red wine down my throat because he wanted to know all about this project. And we had a wonderful dinner. And the next morning over breakfast, he said, I'm going to buy this myself. And I was kind of quite taken aback. Well, why do you do that? I said, look, you're a kind of a developing mining entrepreneur. I've been there and I've kind of done that. And there are a few things I look at. I don't do the kind of big due diligence thing. What I do is I firstly ask around about you. Are you a reliable kind of guy? And yeah, you kind of tick the boxes. The second thing is your team. You've given me the names of your team, and my assistant wrote them all down. Those are pretty reliable kind of guys too as well. And thirdly, what do I think about your estimate of the diamond value? Well, I think you're being horribly conservative, according to Professor John Gurney. Again, rest in peace. And he asked me, do you know John? I said, I do. And I said, well, if John thinks I'm conservative, I would, by the way, agree with him, but I can't agree with him publicly because I have to go with the stats. He said, okay, introduce me to De Beers and I will write the check for $49 million. So I introduced him to De Beers and I said, the check is going to come from this Swiss bank. And the head of legal at the time, who went on to become CEO, says, well, I don't recognize the name of the bank. It must be some typical con from a junior company. And I said, with the greatest of respect, sir, your managing director is a director of this Swiss bank. Oh, I said, look, I know nothing about it. Best just you go and talk to your managing director, which he did. He came back and said, oh, all good. We'll accept your money. And they did. The whole deal was done within 2 weeks. And, you know, in my experience, having actually done several mining deals, if you don't have this kind of strong momentum coming in behind a mining deal, then it's actually unlikely to actually continue. What Lucas Lundin also said at that time said, we make no secret of this. Yes, we're buying De Beers' 70% share for $49 million, but we will also buy you out in the end because I would like 100% of this. And he, of course, he made good on his promise, but we made him pay a 30% premium when he bought us out for 100%. So not only did we deliver the mine for $120 million, by the way, and as I said at the beginning that we paid a dividend in the second year of operation. It produced the world's second largest diamond. It's a model corporate citizen, as it is actually today. It has a female Botswana CEO, which is absolutely fabulous. But the very important part from a mining entrepreneurial perspective is this produced a 25 times return to the original shareholders of African Diamonds. And that's, you know, why people invest in mining stocks such as this. And the other kind of very important metric is for those people who consistently invested over the lifetime of African Diamonds, they made 10 times their money. And one of the important things here, and the discussions I had with the CEO of Lucara, who eventually bought out African Diamonds, and obviously when you buy another company, the CEO loses his job, and that's absolutely fine because you have to work in the best interest of shareholders. Now, he thought that size mattered. And many people are kind of, in my view, preoccupied with size in terms of my company's a 1 billion company or my company's $100 billion. Actually, it means nothing. What means much more is what is your return to your shareholders? Because many of these shareholders could be met like many people actually on this call, putting in 10,000 Rand, 10,000 Pula, 10,000 pounds, and they want a return. And if they've made 25 times their money, they don't care whether you're a $1 billion company or a 1 Rand company. They want to make a return. And that's, in fact, actually what they did. So I'd like to draw several leadership lessons from this in the context of the compass model, which I started with, but in a kind of a slightly more practical kind of takeaway thing, which you can take away. And as I said at the beginning, I'm going to share my notes with Rudy, and he can share them as he sees fit. The first one is about having a absolutely crystal clear and crisp strategy, but supporting that are deep core values of integrity, honesty, teamwork, and all of these things. But at the same time as this, you must be opportunistic. And in the common purpose kind of leadership paradigm, we call this core and flex. The core are parts of things which you don't give up. You don't give up on your strategy. You don't give up on your values. We would not, and we didn't, accept money from people who were questionable. You know, it was legal to have done so, And it would have been easy to have done so when the company had no money, we weren't paying salaries, but we were not going to do that because it just was an affront to our values. But equally, there is a flex about being opportunistic in terms of your mine design and things such as that. The second part, and this is actually even more relevant today than I think it was back in 2009 or 2005, is do not be afraid to try new technological or innovative approaches. It's not just about new exploration technology or new mining technology, but we almost wrote a new book in terms of how we would govern and run the mine from an organizational perspective, how we would reward people. We didn't adopt the old Patterson banding system, which Rudy would be so familiar with, which is kind of widespread across the kind of mining organization. Number three, be acutely aware of the ecosystem with which you work, political, economic, and corporate. My mother was a historian, and she was very disappointed I didn't do a degree in history and kind of continue with that. But the one lesson I still remember from that is be an avid reader of history and see why decisions were made and in what particular context they were, because the context is always changing. And that provides you with a wonderful opportunity to look at different business models for old stuff. And that's very, very opposite in terms of the technological environment we operate now. The next one, and this is a rare thing, is be intensely curious. It's such a rare thing that when I look to employ an exploration geologist, for example, we do very good degrees in this country of geology degrees, but for an exploration geologist, I want someone who researches history. I want someone who asks questions, even if they're obvious, because sometimes those obvious questions have not so obvious actually answers behind it. And it's something I try and drum into people who I work with. Be intensely curious. Why did you do it that way? Why didn't you do it that way? And it's not just technological. It's about organizational design, leadership, all of those kind of things. The next one is something that Rudy and I were chatting about a couple of days ago, about cultivating and building strong and resilient networks. Now, in the time that we were building this mine, things like LinkedIn and Facebook, and I'm delighted to see this is being broadcast live to Facebook, social media wasn't such a big thing as it is today. And I'm very well aware now that, if you're an entrepreneur, you are the brand. You are synonymous with the company in which you work. So you actually have to actively manage your social media. Let me give you a couple of examples. On LinkedIn, for example, is that, I try and post 2 or 3 times a week. It's been a lot more this week because of the whole BHP Anglo-American De Beers thing, but not just your own post, but also find out people who you follow, whether they're a great leadership influencer or whether they're a great business influencer or a financing influencer. Follow them, make comments on their posts. And then you suddenly realize your network has expanded, and then you get introduced to all sorts of very interesting people and very interesting discussions. But you've got to keep this going. Now, even if you go on holiday, the concept of holidays is redundant if you're a mining entrepreneur. My chairman said to me, I think I joined on the 1st of December. I went on holiday round about the 16th, as we do in South Africa. And like I did for De Beers for 21 years, I put my out of office reply on. He phoned me. He said, if you ever do that again, you're fired. I have no problem with you taking holidays and leave and doing different things, but you are always on call. You are running a small junior. If you don't do the work, no one else will be doing the work. So I disabled the out of office reply. That was when 17 years ago, and it remains permanently disabled. 3 more to go. This one is quite a boring one, but I think a really important one. Be an inveterate electronic filer. If I ask the question to you, and you might want to answer this later publicly or not so publicly, is how many of your public presentations can you quickly get onto and share on the internet? Now, I ask that is that when I first looked at this, I only found one particular website which does that, and that's SlideShare. So if you go onto my SlideShare site, you'll see public presentations going back to my De Beers days, so well over 20 years ago, that are sitting there for people to actually look at. Because I often say to people, God, that was a really interesting thought. Can you share with me that presentation you did in 2015? And they look like I'm a dinosaur. You're too old. No, we don't have that anymore. But have that. It's a repository of skills. I'm sure the managing director of De Beers won't mind me actually saying this, but on Saturday morning, he messaged me and asked me, I see you shared a whole load of presentations on De Beers strategy, which you gave during the period 2001 to 2005 to business schools, the Tanaka Business School in Imperial College, the Wits Business School, sadly not UKZN Business School, but several business schools. And because they're public presentations, they're in the public domain, and I reshared them, trying to emphasize learn the lessons of history. So he asked for them because clearly a large corporate organization such as that probably struggled to find them, whereas they were very easily visible on my kind of SlideShare site. The final two are kind of much softer, and I'm probably going to skip the two other shorter stories to lead on to questions. And the penultimate one talks to the very final comment I want to make about legacy. And I think this is where Rudy and I started our conversation about a year ago. And this is something quite soft, and it's part of the speech I gave to two of my daughters when they got married. I've got four daughters, two of them are married. And there's a very simple maxim I try and live my life by. Many people think it's from the Bible, but it isn't. It's by a priest called John Bradford, round about 1550. I don't think people can be very accurate with that date. And it simply says, there but by the grace of God go I. Which basically means that you should, in everything that you do, whether it be corporate work, NPO work, family work, whatever it is you always have an eye out for those who are less fortunate than yourself. And you try and kind of lend a hand wherever you can, whether it be with a bit of money or whether it be with kind of trying to upskill somebody, trying to develop something. And, you know, a lovely kind of recognition of this, not that one ever wants recognition of this, is I was invited by the president of Botswana last February to go and have coffee with him. And I was floored. Why on earth would a president want to come and talk to me? I run small little juniors, you know, insignificant little juniors. And I asked him this question, and he laughed. He said, you know what? You've been in and out of Botswana for the past 30 years. You've built Larala. You've helped develop the whole Karowe thing and make it the mine it is. You know, you've done so much for Botswana. I just wanted to have a cup of coffee with you to thank you. And I thought, wow, what a great politician. Anyway, he's a fantastic guy, and there we go. And the final part to that, my kind of 10th point on the practical side, is back yourself. Or by all means, listen to people. But if you really believe there's something that you can actually make good on, back yourself. The final thing, and I'm going to jump the corporate and NPO stories, are much shorter, quite a bit more boring. If there's time in the questions, I'll go back to them under Rudy's direction. If there's not, so be it. It's about legacy. And it's something we all think about when we get a little bit older. I'm God willing, going to turn 60 next month. And you're always thinking about what legacy do you leave for your family? What legacy do you leave for your children? And I think that's very, very important. But equally important is, what is your business or NPO or corporate legacy? A legacy is not saying, oh, I was the general manager of XYZ company. Well, good for you. You know, that's a wonderful thing, and you've done very well, and you've got all the trappings associated with it. But what have you done as an individual that has made people's lives better? And people's lives better, you can mean in the most general sense, in terms of making society better, individuals' lives better, groups' lives better, so that when someone writes your obituary, it's not just that you're a wonderful dad, mother, partner, father, son, etc., which we all hope we are, but you've actually made a contribution to society in the way that you can, and be remembered in that way too as well. So Rudy, there's my half an hour.
James, what a pleasure to listen to you. I was really inspired. I laughed at some of the anecdotal stories, because it took me back about 20 years when I was working at Finch Mine with you. And as you were talking, I could just imagine the interactions you were having with the likes of, you say, Nicky Oppenheimer and various other mining luminaries. The stories that you tell, and I think the messages that you've raised are not only applicable to mining, but it's applicable to personal lives. It's applicable to the general kind of business environment. And I know that there are a couple of CEOs on this link today. So I want to challenge them on behalf of you, that same question that you raised about what legacy are you leaving? And in fact, it's a question that needs to be applied to everyone. Every single person here should leave a legacy one day, whether it's in their personal lives or their professional lives. But I want to come back to two questions, and I think the one question is particularly pertinent to your presentation. And the question is, what needs to be done to reclaim South Africa's rightful place in the mining sector internationally? We used to be number one in terms of gold mining. We used to be probably in the top 5 in diamond minings, and we have slid from those positions. So what can we do in order to reclaim our for want of a better word, positions?
Rudy, I tend to answer things in either numbers of 3 or 5, because that's what my kind of brain can kind of cope with. And I think there are 3 important points here. The first one is we have incredibly complicated legislation. The legislation to explore and mine in this country is reams. You go to Botswana, it's a short ream. It's much, much simpler. For example, in Botswana, you have 1 stage of applying for a mining a prospecting license. You either get it or you don't. South Africa has 4 stages. Secondly, financing. It is incredibly difficult to raise money on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange for exploration. And without exploration, you don't have mines. It's a fact. And why is that the case? Firstly, is that South Africans' culture, and this goes back to pre-1994, is an investment manager would not go wrong if he invested in Old Mutual, Standard Bank, Anglo American, well, you might with Anglo now, but those kind of companies. And so there was no culture of funding entrepreneurial development. So what's happened is that culture has not gone. It's actually still there at the moment. And the second part to it is the financial legislation makes it very difficult to invest in companies like myself. I had a meeting with the CIO of Old Mutual, Chief Investment Officer of Old Mutual. I don't know why he took a meeting with me, but he did. And he said to me, "Where is your discounted cash flow?" I said, "I'm an explorer. I have no discounted cash flow." "Oh, I don't know how to value an exploration company." End of conversation. Markets like London, New York, Toronto, Sydney, they understand how to value a mining entrepreneur, like they do a tech entrepreneur, like they do a biochemical entrepreneur. That's number 2. Number 3, we don't train in mining entrepreneurs. And let me give you one small example, and this might talk straight to many of the very wise guys that, who are on the faculty of UKZN here, is that I'm often told that WITS has a school of mines. Now, I went to a Royal School of Mines in London, where I did final year subjects I'm a geologist, in mining engineering, in metallurgy, in mineral economics. And I think, Rudy, I even did one in organizational development and behavior, which many people skipped, but I went along to it. Whereas if I look at the WITS School of Mines, I ask the geologists coming from them, where's your engineering? to the geologists. Oh no, we can't do that because it falls under the engineering faculty. So I said, then you don't have a school of mines. No, we don't. So we don't have a school of mines in Southern Africa. And if you had a school of mines and you complemented that with something that I might do a doctoral on, I might not, I'm just still thinking about it, is a mining incubator. Now, you all know about the incubators in Stellenbosch and elsewhere, where things like Naspers and these kind of companies come from, which is a juxtaposition of technical skills, corporate skills, financing skills, and money backing it. Well, I'm not sure if any of you ever heard of a mining incubator, but there are 3 that I know of, and I've actually worked for all 3 of them, very blessed to work for all 3. We need that in South Africa. I did put that forward to the IDC, and immediately they tried to bureaucratize it. I said, you can't do that. You know, you need to have people who've got scars on their back from exploration failures, but exploration successes too as well. So that's 4, sorry. Complex legislation, both in mining and in finance, lack of real skills development of people going into industry. And then 4thly, absent of a mining incubator, like we have the great incubators coming from Stellenbosch elsewhere.
So what I interpret there is so I think in addition to that, I just want to emphasize the other 2, and that is to be less risk averse in terms of funding entrepreneurs. I mean, this is a key challenge in South Africa, where many startup companies find it very difficult to raise capital. And secondly, I think the incubation. So incubation is very, very important because it allows people the space to test. It allows people the opportunity to engage. And I think maybe, you know, for the powers that be at UKZN is to convert the entire university in one massive incubation center. Let me see if there are any other questions. Henry, anything from the chat side that you would like to comment on, please?
Thank you, Hazel. My other remark was, I think there is a question from an anonymous attendee about explaining and defining electronic filing in a more descriptive manner. I'm not sure if James would like to respond to that question.
Absolutely, Professor. Is that I use OneDrive for all of my my work, and everything I'm allowed to publicly keep, I keep on that, going back decades. And I can access it from my phone, from my computer, from my laptop. And often I find that if you don't do that kind of thing, you go back and think, well, I actually wrote that memo about 15 years ago on something. There was something quite important in that. So I do a Google search on my OneDrive and I find it. So people laugh at me. Here's another analogy for you, Prof, is I've been running Microsoft Money for 25 years. So when my daughter says to me, Dad, no, she's 35, my oldest, Dad, no, things are very different today. No, things are so much more expensive. And, you know, it wasn't like that when you were 35. I go back and I look at Microsoft Money to my, you know, the Campbell family income statement when I was 35. And I printed out and I said to her, what's so different now? Most of my money went on mortgage and school fees. What is yours? Mortgage and school fees. There you go. But it's that kind of thing. You know, people think it's very old-fashioned and anal, but the learning's coming from that. When people often say, oh, things are so different today. Well, yes, they are, but they will always be different, and they'll always be different tomorrow. So it's always good to kind of get that kind of context there.
Thanks. Thanks, James. I just want to inform everyone that the notes that you will send me, I will post it onto the Aerotropolis Institute Africa website, so that we encourage people to visit our website to get the latest updates on what is happening in our world. I want to come back to higher education. You know, we have, in a very short 2 or 3 minutes, what role do you think that the higher education institution should play in terms of nurturing innovation, entrepreneurship, and resilience? Any thoughts on that, please?
Rudy, while we are listing questions, I don't know if James wants to just make a note of that one. I saw there was a live question hand come up from Hamish as well. I think we may be able to fit him in as well, if you don't mind.
That's no fine, Hamish.
Hi, good afternoon, Rudy. Can you hear me okay?
You can hear you loud and clear.
Lovely. Thanks so much. James, thanks so much. I mean, you know, you've caught so much of, I mean, I understand it perfectly, you know, and so much, I guess, of where we are as a business, and there's so much resonance with what you said. That resilience, that passion, that ability to find ways through and you know, roll with situations and find best solutions. How do you, and in your experience, and I'd love it if you could give me one of your 5-point answers, because then I can, you know, have multiple options to look at. How do you build teams that can perform at that level? Because I mean, I can see it in yourself, and you're bringing yourself and the individual to the picture. But you know, you've got to build a team to do that. You've got to instill a culture in that team that aligns with that kind of business approach. And what could you guide us in terms of your experience in that? Yeah, that's really my question. Thanks, Rudy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hamish. I'll try and give you a three kind of thing as opposed to a 5 kind of thing. The first one is you must take a direct role in the recruitment of your subordinates. Don't ever delegate it to actually anybody else. Yes, someone else might run the process actually for you, if you have an HR department, for example, but you must directly lead the process yourself and look at all the different people who come into it. The second part is values are non-negotiable. If the person doesn't share you or your organization's value, don't even think about it, even if they are an absolutely brilliant performer. Values are absolutely non-negotiable. And thirdly, and there are 2 items here which are sides of the same coin, different sides of the same coin. Demand absolute performance and have very short tolerance for mediocrity. So, you know, be prepared to exit people and exit people quickly. And I know that's not something that it may not be politically correct, but if you want to drive high-performing teams, in my view, and also, by the way, I think still be able to have those networks where you can go back to teams that you ran 10 or 20 years ago, because they will remember the experiences of working, is have strong values, reward strong performance, and get rid of mediocrity quickly.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes. Are there any other burning questions that people would like to pose? Okay. James, I'm going to thank you just from my side very quickly, because then I'm going to hand it over to Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that we've left people wanting for more, so that we can create an intellectual culture, a way of conversing around complex issues and topics, because that is the only way that we are going to come up with, hopefully, sustainable solutions. So be on standby. We might call you back in the latter part of this year to attend another online seminar. But thank you very much for sharing your stories, sharing your insights, and just being available to assist us on the Aerotropolis Institute Africa. Brad, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. And James, what a wonderful presentation and an insight into your experiences. And just to echo what Rudy's just said, I somehow get the sense, I have a feeling of deja vu, Rudy, that James will be visiting us many times again in the future. And I'm not going to try and repeat and echo the sentiments that have already been expressed on the chat group and by everybody. But I'm going to spend 2.5 minutes just giving a summary and some takeaways. And then at the end, I'm going to give a vote of thanks. So these are the things, James, that jumped out at me as you were speaking this afternoon. And first of all, the power of storytelling. I mean, this whole afternoon was about telling a story. And if Africa and Africa's history, which I think is something that you're passionate about, is anything, Africa's history is about storytelling. It's about you, it's about your team, and most importantly, and I think particularly relevant to the AIA, Rudy, is that size doesn't matter. So we have a team basically of myself, Henry, and Rudy, and we, I think, are going to make a big impact and a big ripple in the dam of South Africa. The things you spoke about around core values, not being negotiable, clear strategy, being opportunistic, being intentionally curious, having strong and resilient networks, and leaving a legacy. And you know, James, I think I was many years ago, I was also tangentially involved in the mining sector, and Clem Sunter used to sit on my board. And I remember him saying to me, he said, in the first half of your career, you write your CV. And in the second half of your career, you write your epitaph. So just that is where I'll leave the first 2.5 minutes of my concluding remarks. But I think just in conclusion to say thanks, I think I'm going to work like this. First of all, I think, Rudy, we need to acknowledge the audience and the fantastic turnout that we've had this afternoon. And I think that we've certainly set ourselves a benchmark in terms of the numbers and the quality of people that have attended this afternoon. We need to acknowledge the likes of our strategic partners like AIA, the Department of Economic Development, Tourism, and Environmental Affairs. Key partners that we're working with at the moment, like Dube Tradeport. Our internal team, so thanks to our PR team, Hazel Langa and Ayanda Radebe, thanks so much for making sure that the back end and the technology worked as well as it did this afternoon. So thank you so much to you. I'd like to acknowledge the team that I work with, James. I'd like to acknowledge my director, Rudy, and and Professor Wissink Henry. I think we're starting to form the foundations to a great team of people that are going to make a big difference. And finally, James, I'd like to give thanks to yourself. I can see a lot of work went into what you said this afternoon. And so much of what makes a difference is when you give of yourself. When there's personal investment and you can see someone has really gone and thought about what they needed to speak about. And I think that I echo the sentiments of everybody this afternoon. And that, I think, is what you did for us this afternoon. So, Rudy, I hope that I haven't left anybody out. But I think that today has been a resounding success. And I look forward to the next one. James, I'm going to be doing a quick punt for the next seminar/webinar we've got on the 25th of June, where we'll be talking about the use of advanced aerial technology in mitigating natural disasters. And we've got some illustrious speakers that will be attending. So to all of us, especially the guests online, please look out for the next advertisement and save the date for the 25th of June. And we look forward to seeing you there. Rudy and team, thanks so much.